Oh, $5,700 for a PS3? I couldn't tell you how to navigate a PlayStation to save my life. Can you connect your PlayStation 3 to a printer? Generic intro into that goes Moo here, back with another Scott the Wild's video, and today we're doing Xbox 360 versus PlayStation 3 Battle of a Generation, which was suggested heavily in the comment section of last week's video. It had a ton of likes, which is the best way to let me know what the next Scott the Wild's video should be, because I read every single one of your comments. But last week's video was, I believe it was, what was it, Game Baths and the best-selling consoles of all time, and I was very disappointed that there was no Wii U on that list. That's just a joke. Apparently the Wii U sold terribly. Your type of reaction to that video, I'll leave it right up there. Also, link down below in the description. Also, to place my channel, all my other Scott the Wild's reactions. Go in a chronological order if you want to binge watch them, and I've been enjoying these so much. I remember back in the days where you were either Xbox or a PlayStation person, or you're a Call of Duty or you're a Halo person. I was an Xbox person and a Call of Duty person. That's what I grew up with. Never had a PlayStation. I didn't play Halo until a couple years ago where I live streamed, and that was a crazy experience, and I love Halo. Still don't have a PlayStation though. Maybe in the future that could be something that I get, but I'm really excited to watch this video. Like I said, let me know what the next Scott the Wild's video should be down below in the comment section. I'm gonna learn a lot about the PlayStation 3 in this video. I might learn a little about the Xbox 360 that I didn't know because I was a kid when I had one. But let's go ahead and jump into this video, and also shout out to patrons because I could not do this if it was not for them.
Hey y'all, Scott here. Apparently my input on wars throughout history is extremely important, so it only makes sense why after the French Revolution in most history textbooks it just says, but what would Scott think?
About the French Revolution?
Class in 2011, and all these kids are discussing politics. Which is better, the PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360?
8th grade going into 9th grade for me.
Scott, which one do you prefer? And
Xbox.
You ruined your credibility.
Nintendo.
That summer is when I got my first 360 because my brother went to college.
In your life, why not defend plastic?
So for my birthday,
thousands of dollars on a new computer are fun. You don't want to actively admit, yeah, yours is better. I'm the idiot. You want to make sure your purchase is justified and have everybody agree with you that the way you spent $400 is better than how I spent.
Back when it was
this kind of debate is especially
Apple, Android,
platforms that are largely similar.
Xbox, PlayStation.
Minor pros and cons between each of them, and nowhere was that more of a thing than with the console.
Look at that DS. Look at that beautiful thing.
Video game consoles. 5 entered the ring.
Look at that.
It was a runaway success. We don't count that. The other 2 were portable systems. They had their own fish to fry, so we were left with 2 systems.
Yes.
PlayStation 3 and
with
Xbox 360.
Did it have like 4 gigabytes of storage?
Pit against each other based on the consoles they used each and every generation.
Yeah.
Never before were 2 consoles so perfectly balanced between their strengths and weaknesses. One console did well in one area, while the other.
My brother had a white 360 like that.
The other couldn't even spell right. It's still up for debate nowadays which one is better. It's a very similar
I got
situation to what happened
I think the
with
Black
Sega
Slim
Genesis and Super Nintendo back in the 90s. The difference was the Xbox
bigger
360 and
storage.
PlayStation 3 were more so civil tyrants.
Internal.
The Genesis and Super Nintendo were only interested in what each other's blood tasted like. Console wars have definitely settled down between the companies over the years. What once was a war turned into a competitive picnic. But the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 were truly out to get each other.
And now crossplay is
They
a
didn't like
thing.
each other one bit, which meant I know what I'm gonna do tonight. I'm gonna recall the history of these consoles duking it out, and afterwards we'll pit the 2 against each other in a variety of categories to see which one I end up personally preferring. I plan the best
250?
parts.
Is that what I
the
had?
video game landscape and who was on top was and still
remember our cousin
is
had to use a thumb drive.
changing. Atari was king until they were
That's
stupid.
storage.
Nintendo overtook gaming for a while until Sega came along with the Genesis and actually outsold Nintendo's offerings for a bit there until they tried to succeed so hard they failed. Nintendo took over again, but then Sony came into the picture with the PlayStation, and that blew up.
And then PlayStation 2 because it was a DVD player.
A new generation of systems comes along.
Crash
it's somebody here
Bandicoot
who'll
might
take the
be
crown.
my next
It's never always Nintendo or always
playthrough
Sony,
series
but it's
franchise.
never Sega. So, if you had the resources to create a video game console, go for it. Go for it. You have nothing to lose except everything. You have the potential to be the best-selling game console of all time. I'm telling my kids that. So when Sony was working on their next console, the PlayStation 2, Microsoft entered the ring by
with the
announcing
Xbox.
the Xbox.
Was that controller
Give
called the
Sony a
Duke?
run for their money. I'm sure
Really?
Sony keeps this photo on their nightstand. What happened here? I mean, it makes sense for Sony to win, but by this much? Well, lots of things added to this happening.
DVD player.
Well, I made the point that just because a company did well one generation doesn't mean that success will transfer over to the next. That most certainly happened here. The PlayStation was a huge hit, over 100 million consoles sold.
Didn't have
the
one.
next one on the horizon being definitively called the PlayStation 2. What did you think would happen? It's like everybody loves bread. Bread 2 comes out, it's gonna sell well.
Bread.
The
There's no
PS2
bread
launched
in my
the
house.
year 2000. Microsoft released the Xbox 1 year later, so not only did Sony get a year's head start on Microsoft,
that
which meant by the time the
played
Xbox released, the
a
PS2 already had a
significant
year's
factor.
worth of games in its library, but they also had brand recognition on their side. People knew what a PlayStation
It was first
was. The
Xbox, yeah.
scared people. Plus, DVDs were getting big at the time. The PlayStation 2 was a DVD player. So
I remember getting a DVD player for Christmas.
Games, plus pretty much
just
all
the DVD
third-party
player
games you could possibly ask for. Even though the Xbox had a lot of these things going for it, they were only in spirit. It could play DVDs as long as you bought the DVD remote accessory. Without this, you couldn't play DVDs. That was stupid.
What?
It had exclusive games. It had third-party stuff, but most exclusives, well, not bad. It didn't really shake the world, and a lot of the biggest third-party games, while running and looking far better on the Xbox, came out a while after the PS2 versions did. This little guy put up a fair fight, but it obviously wasn't going to beat out the PlayStation 2. By the time it came out, Sony basically already won that generation. But of course, Microsoft wasn't discouraged by getting second place. People loved this thing. Look at it.
I loved
It's
it.
so buff. For a first
I loved
timer,
it.
Xbox did quite well.
Didn't play Halo
It beat
on it,
out
though.
Nintendo's GameCube in terms of sales, and it did have at least one exclusive series that mattered: Halo. Most third-party games you'd want to play that generation did
Burnout
actually come
2.
to the system. For a newcomer console, the Xbox did about as well as it
Dude,
could
if
have
I
possibly
see
done.
him
and Microsoft had
share
the deep pockets to
Midtown
support
Madness
it.
2, I'm gonna
This
get
system
hyped.
rarely turned a profit ever. They may have sold a decent amount of them, but they were losing money on this thing. For most companies, if their first console didn't turn a profit, they normally say, "Let's get out of here." But Microsoft can afford to do anything they want. They have an
That's
endless
true.
supply of money. They can launch a
They
game
do.
console, go to space, go bankrupt, whatever they want. They have so much money, and the Xbox supplanted itself as a worthwhile brand, so Microsoft did the unthinkable. They never learned to count. The
Yeah,
Xbox
just
360
jumped to
was revealed
360.
on May
Remember the
12th,
Xbox
2005 on
720
MTV because
rumors?
TBS was busy that day. Microsoft was serious with making the system a
like,
massive
edited
deal,
pictures?
and something that Sony should have been legitimately scared of. Instead, they were pretty confident with their next console, the PlayStation 3's success. I mean, after your last two systems were the most popular systems in history, it's easy to get a big head and think anybody will buy something with the word Sony on it. Shortly after the Xbox 360's
E3.
reveal, Sony revealed info on the PS3, how it was
I'm gonna learn
leaps
so
and
much in
bounds
this
more
video.
technologically advanced than
All
Microsoft
those
offered.
numbers.
I mean, this thing had it all. 2 USB ports, 3 more USB ports, another
like a
USB
phone
port.
now.
The entire system was built around
probably
something
less.
called the cell processor, which was a highly advanced technology that nobody knew how to use. It was pretty difficult for programmers to actually utilize the cell processor and make games for it. But Sony was so arrogant after the past 2 generations, there was this mentality that developers would learn to program for it because we made the PlayStation 2. Everybody loves us. Like, if the
then
cell
Microsoft
processor takes a
is
lot of time to
developers,
figure
developers,
out, developers
developers.
spend all their time making games for the PS3 because it's so difficult, they won't have time to make games for the Xbox 360. Sony knew they had brand recognition on their side, so decided to make the ultimate video game.
Didn't they make it
box.
more expensive,
Backwards
too?
compatible with all generations of PlayStation.
Which is
the
smart.
most powerful architecture imaginable. A compact flash card reader because you need that. They weren't constructing the world's most video game console. They were making a government super.
The Halo music in the
It could do
background.
anything and everything you'd want a thing to do. It could play the up-and-coming high-def Blu-ray discs. Sony was banking on that being a huge
It
selling
was.
point, much like how the
Well,
PS2
well,
playing
Blu-ray
DVDs
was a big deal.
It had the best-looking games and the most USB ports. Sony knew people would flock to the PlayStation again instead of the Xbox, so they decided to make the greatest device they could because they knew people would buy it regardless of the cost, regardless of the cost.
Regardless of the cost. That's the biggest problem. Call of Duty 2.
The PlayStation 3 being slated for spring 2006 until being delayed to holiday 2006.
Oof.
Much like how the
A year.
PS2 released a year ahead of the
Yep,
competition,
that's a Best Buy.
I feel that the Xbox 360 doing the same did numbers to its success. Microsoft had a year head start on Sony, which meant by the time the PS3 would launch, they'd have a beefy library of games at their disposal, a potentially better price point of the console, a larger install base of players, which was
Is he
a
gonna talk
big
about the
deal in
Red Ring of
era
Death?
online gaming. Plus, they were the first console to show off what at the time was next-gen graphics. So by the time the
look at
PS3
that.
would come out, it wouldn't have been.
I remember
as
thinking that looked
revolutionary looking.
realistic.
But Sony couldn't care less about
I remember this
Microsoft. They were
commercial.
confident that people would drop everything in their life at the moment for the right to buy a PlayStation 3. But then during their E3 2006 press conference, Sony said, "You know what? We haven't f***ed up in a while. Let's do it." This conference will always live in infamy, the moment that many stopped looking at the PS3 with excitement and instead with embarrassment. The entire presentation was awkward with how lines were delivered and the games honestly looking pretty boring. A lot of this stuff didn't look that much better than what Microsoft was putting out, which made it sting even more when it ended with a mortgage.
The 20 gigabyte
a mortgage.
PlayStation 3 will retail for $499
I mean, back then,
US
yeah, that would be a
dollars,
mortgage.
549
Now car payments are more than
Canadian
that.
dollars. And the 60 gigabyte PlayStation 3 for $599 US dollars, $659 Canadian.
Back then, I didn't even know that much money existed. To be fair, Sony was taking a loss on PlayStation 3s at that price point.
$240 on every
more to
PS.
produce than what they were selling them for. However, that didn't matter. It was still clear. Nobody wanted to spend $600 for the right to play this. This was when a lot of people
Gears of
sprung
War,
on the Xbox 360.
Which there's gonna be a new one of these coming
It was
out.
fairly solid, and you got pretty much all the games that were coming to PS3, so You can't blame anybody for going this route. Holiday rolled around and the PS3 launched right before the Nintendo Wii, and people were going nuts.
The Wii.
People were camping out waiting to scoop up these consoles and immediately sell them on eBay for a profit. I do this with Robitussin during flu season, I get it, but people are taking this incredibly seriously. The PS3 was expected to be a smash
$5,700 for a PS3?
What a failure, I'm open to that too. For the first few years of its life, the PS3 was the laughingstock of the gaming industry. It was overpriced and didn't have a ton of compelling exclusive games. Multi-platform titles often ran worse on the system because, one, the Xbox 360 was easier to develop for, so developers would make games for it first and then hastily port it over to PS3, and B, the Xbox 360 was more popular, so developers would make games for it first and then hastily port it over to PS3. I mean, that thing had a bigger library and more exclusives initially, with a lower starting price compared to the PS3. It was obvious if you wanted a new console, comparing the two, the 360 just made more sense.
Or you bought a Wii.
Didn't help the PS3 ads were fucking weird. See, that just shows
they're
how
weird.
arrogant Sony
I remember
was at
them.
the time.
They're weird.
They thought, oh, we'll creep people out with our PlayStation 3 commercials. It's the PS3. People will want it regardless.
I mean, they're memorable.
But the PS3's problems didn't mean the 360 was having the greatest of times. More and more hardware malfunctionings were occurring.
Did you just like put a towel
for failures.
over the 360?
Infamous Red Ring of Death, which meant your system was pretty much donezo.
No, you can fix it.
Better sales-wise, Microsoft had to deal with repairs, spend a crazy amount on warranties, and overall just had to live with the bad press that 360 got when it came to reliability. So, one had no games, and the other didn't work. You really had to pick your poison.
Yeah,
Within the first
get a
year,
Wii.
Sony took drastic steps to
Hey, if the
improve
Wii U would have released back then?
price, removing features that were sort of worthless to reduce costs. I will never forget you, CF card reader. More and more exclusives were coming out, like Little Big Planet and Uncharted, but right when Sony was starting to turn things around, Microsoft just had to release Halo 3.
Oh,
This may
there
be
we
one
go.
of the biggest moments in gaming
Halo
history,
3 's
just
so
based on
good.
the energy surrounding the launch.
Let's play this on my
of
channel,
one.
me playing through it.
Everybody knew Halo 3 was launching. It was a big deal. But then after that, Microsoft kind of gave up. The 360 no doubt had loads of fantastic exclusive games, but most of the big ones came in the first few years of that system's life. Gears of War, Viva Pinata, Crackdown, it all led up to Halo 3.
I didn't play any of these until recently.
I mean, sequels to these games came out, but really, Microsoft kind of got content with where they were at and stopped fighting nearly as hard. Sony continued to fund exclusive games and reduced the PS3's price until finally giving it a much-needed redesign.
$300? Wow, that's much better.
It was featured in a new ad campaign that highlighted the system's unique features.
I remember those
Microsoft
commercials.
kept at it with redesigning the system's user interface, offering avatars like Nintendo's Mii's, and focusing on media consumption with streaming apps. As time went on,
who would
it
think
felt
that's
like
the future?
roles were reversing. Sony was trying to win over the hardcore gamer with excellent games, while Microsoft was trying to transform the Xbox 360 into this all-in-one entertainment hub for everybody, which was the initial mission statement.
Got turned
of the
into
PlayStation 3.
what?
Both companies tried their hands at motion controllers to combat the Nintendo Wii. Sony had the PlayStation Move and Microsoft
the Kinect.
Yep. While both were equally fucking stupid in their own right, they all felt more like a way to turn your PS3
Like a
into
Icarus video
Wii
about
if you're into that
skateboarding
sort of
games
thing.
that
The
comes out
Kinect
tomorrow.
felt more like something Microsoft wanted everybody to have
Patron
and
should have
positioned
it
it as a
today.
replacement for the Wii. You could control the games with your body. That's insane. I fucking hated my thumbs anyways. The Kinect did insanely well, much better than the PlayStation Move. But that came at a cost. While Sony was focusing on making
Twisted Metal.
legitimately good video games to win back the trust of the gaming community,
Infamous 2.
Microsoft fully shifted the Xbox brand into casual all-in-one entertainment after the Kinect's success. At least they released a redesigned system that actually worked this time. The last couple years of these systems' active lives before their successors released were fairly
Do you think
different.
they saw
Sony just
PC
kept
gaming
pumping out
coming?
exclusive after exclusive, getting games to come to PS3 with exclusive content, while
BioShock
Microsoft kept
Infinite.
focusing on Halo, Gears of War, Forza,
Also a
Kinect
game I
games,
recently
with Call of
played
Duty thrown in there with all the DLC coming to Xbox first. The 360 was still ahead, but was losing the support of the hardcore community, while Sony was doing wonders to regaining trust and rebuilding the PS3's image. While Sony still had tons of trouble occur during this time, most notably the PlayStation Network hack and outage of 2011,
dude, I remember
they
that.
stood strong and focused on making the PlayStation 3 the gamer's console. Both
I don't know what
systems
game that
received
was.
one more redesign later in
That
their lives,
Xbox
thanks to
just
when
looks
Sony
like
giving us consoles so cheap I can
SpongeBob
break it over
Brown
my
Pants.
knee. Keyword try.
Try.
Sony had one more ace up their sleeve with The Last of Us releasing in summer of 2013, right before the launch of their next console, the PlayStation 4. One of the most critically acclaimed games of all time as an exclusive.
What about GTA
Got a lot of
5?
people to pick up a PlayStation 3
On the
mere months
360,
before
and then
the
drops
next
on the
PlayStation
one,
was coming out.
like,
That's pretty impressive. And throughout
a year
all of
later.
this, while the Xbox 360 was winning the war for most of the generation, when all was said and done, it was actually Sony who ended up winning. Yeah,
What?
This is still crazy to me. I still always look at the Xbox 360 as the winner in terms of sales, and while that was true for the majority of its life, the PlayStation 3 picked up so much steam later on it actually ended up winning.
A classic underdog story. It always warms my heart to see a multi-billion-dollar corporation win at the end of the day. But who
I have a thing against certain
Sony.
But who do
multi-billion-dollar corporations?
So it's come down to this. I'm gonna pit these
one
two
in
consoles
particular
against each other in 9 categories and see which one ends up winning based on my preferences. Now, my personal history with these consoles was I was always a Nintendo guy. My state's government already knows that. But in 2011, I had enough of being the only guy in school who didn't have something that couldn't play Barrel Blast. So I had to decide: did I want an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3?
I wonder if he got both.
Both had U-Star too, so it really didn't matter. I ended up going with the Xbox 360. But I always wondered if things would be different on the other side. I finally bit the bullet 5 years later and bought a used red PlayStation 3. I've barely used this thing. But this is the perfect opportunity to play this for the first time and play this to bring back memories and see which one comes out on top. Both of these systems have had 3 different designs released throughout their lives, and the first iterations are both absolutely iconic. This system looks like a fun box. This system looks like a space heater.
It does.
The original PS3
or a humidifier.
Bad by any means, but it looks like it's trying its hardest to look futuristic and expensive.
PS5
and just ended up looking like it really wanted to be taken seriously and instead got called a fucking grill. Both of these are pretty beefy consoles.
George Foreman grill.
I'd be worried if I swallowed one. I do think the original Xbox 360 had more of a personality, though. You could swap out the faceplates. I think every company tries this at least once and then never again, but this was a neat little idea.
Yeah.
At least the PS3's PlayStation logo could be rotated based on its orientation.
Kind of cool.
Yeah, we need new models. The slim variants of both systems. Now, I will say both of these were desperately needed. The PS3 needed a more cost-effective and attractive model, and the 360 needed a model that actually worked.
Yep.
Definitely, the 360S was the most necessary revision.
360S, I've never heard it called that.
Red Ring of Death, no Wi-Fi built in, no HDMI built in, yeah.
You had to have a little Wi-Fi adapter
the least expensive model only had
Ethernet?
4 gigabytes of storage. Oh, that's worthless. Now, to be fair, around 2007, Microsoft released the Xbox 360 Elite with HDMI built in. Still the original design. I'm worried this is going to catch on fire, and I don't even own one. The PS3 Slim, well, it
I mean, I had a
bit of
Samsung Note 7, best phone ever, by the way.
It was an excellent upgrade in terms of aesthetics. This system looks so good and still retains a lot of the character.
I had that thing until they were literally going to
go
brick
cheaper,
the phone.
So Sony released the PS3 Super Slim. Please go back. So this is kind of cute. Look at this. It's like a bathroom stall. The disc tray is a bit problematic on here. It's not terrible, but it's so much cheaper. It's so much louder. Half the time when I open it, pop a disc
it's like a Nerf gun.
It doesn't shut all the way, and I have to nudge it slightly to get it to close properly. And this one started at 12 gigabytes of storage. Yes! Now this was obviously made to be a super cheap entry-level PS3.
And it worked.
Nowhere near sturdy.
Which they don't really do that anymore.
The original. I can't say this is a bad option.
Like
to
they
have.
make the non-disc version.
I like that they tried something different and stupid, but it is undoubtedly the cheapest feeling one. It just doesn't feel like it matters. Well, Microsoft decided to can play at shitty third consoles and came up with this during sleep paralysis. The Xbox 360e. This is one of my least favorite looking consoles of all time. This released
probably
the
my
same
least
year
favorite.
as the Xbox One, so they decided to redesign the 360 to look more like the Xbox One, and who doesn't want to look more like the original Xbox One? The 360 has had a great look.
I'm watching this video on an Xbox One.
How it was subtly
next to my Series X.
Great. So why do this?
And my
I'm just
PC.
Confused and scared. So both consoles had ups and downs with their designs, but if I had to choose one, I'd say the PS3 was the most consistently solid. I don't hate any of these designs. The Super Slim is totally cheap, and the original is totally fat, but I think
it's
they all
just
look at the very least
the
fine.
last
I really do
360
like that original 360 design.
Design is just so bad.
Wi-Fi, HDMI. It was on its deathbed as soon as you bought it. It had problems, and while the S was a great upgrade to reliability,
can't argue with that,
and overall design, the E just completely ruined the 360's chance here.
It did. If it wasn't for that.
The controller is what makes video games a thumb man's game. The Xbox 360
I don't know where my custom 360 controller is.
One of the best controllers of all time. It just feels so substantial. The button placement, the sticks, triggers, everything feels perfect. Of course, it does have some issues. The D-pad is on a similar level to Vlad the Impaler. They updated it later on to be a transforming D-pad, swinging it around to be actively okay. It uses AA batteries for power, which was a bit outdated even for the time. Microsoft would later release play and charge kits, though, which allowed you to simply use a rechargeable battery. You had to pay extra for it, but at least you had the option. But overall, this is still easily one of the greatest controllers out there. Now, on a completely unrelated note, the PlayStation 3 controller. So it initially released as the 6-axis, which had no rumble. That got updated to the DualShock 3, which was everything the 6-axis was, but with rumble. I was waiting to be confused today. But all PS3 controllers basically look the same, which means they all look the same as PS2 controllers, which look the same as PS1 controllers, which are basically the same as a Super Nintendo controller. Sony
maybe this is before the PS4 came out.
Same controller design for 3 consoles at this point. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, sure, but they kept cramming these modern technologies into a decade-old design, and because of that, it was easy to see some cracks forming. It's a bit small for my liking. I was never the biggest fan of the thumbstick placements. They added analog triggers, but the way they're designed make it easy for your fingers to slip off of them. There's also not as much weight to this controller as the 360s, which makes this feel a lot
Granted, this is
flimsier
a
and
one
more
controller.
fragile. Just holding it, you can feel how easy it would be to snap this in two. With the 360 controller, I don't feel it at all. Now, the controller is rechargeable out of the box, which is a nice feature. However, while the battery life is pretty alright, the 360 controller with double A's lasted quite a bit
that's
longer.
actually...
Now, PS3
that
does
was
have
Gears of War,
motion
wasn't it?
controls. You can tilt the
It looked
controller
like it.
around, but my holy god is it gimmicky. I find it funny how people considered the Wii gimmicky back then, and justifiably so. But the PS3 controller
Just
had
with the
motion
nunchuck.
controls as well, and every implementation I've seen of motion controls with this controller were some of the most unnecessary garbage of all time. At least the Wii had bowling going for it.
Yeah.
Now, the PS3 controller does look pretty classy. It looks more elegant. If a 360 controller's on your couch, I immediately think you cheated on your girlfriend and your fingernails look disgusting. This has more class. But it's still better in nearly every way to me. Better layout, better feel, better battery life, no unnecessary gimmicks, a few little issues, but...
And also the custom controllers back in the day.
The PS3 controller isn't bad, but it's just not as rock solid as the competition. The Xbox 360 had so many accessories. A way to play HD movies, a Wi-Fi adapter.
Yep, there it is.
Have those?
All built in.
The PlayStation 3 was the ultimate package. You could play Blu-rays right out of the box, use HDMI, connect to Wi-Fi, play PS1 games, PS2 games, everything. As long as you had the best models. So some of these features, namely Wi-Fi connectivity and PS2 games, were taken out of lower-end PS3s originally to make them as cheap as possible. That does make buying these older models a bit more confusing, as most people don't really know how to differentiate a PS2-compatible Wi-Fi enabled PS3
How do you know?
That's why it's easier to compare the features of the second revisions of each console.
Because they had everything.
Easily, the PS3 still has the most features. Of course, Blu-ray support out of the box. Now, the Xbox 360 had an adapter to play HD DVDs. You're welcome, humanity.
Yeah, because we needed that.
To buy a separate disc drive for a soon-to-be obsolete format at the time. It just didn't stack.
I remember Microsoft picked
that was one of the biggest
that form, and Sony picked Blu-ray.
It was the only system to have it at the time, and it was a great feature. Of course, you had the Xbox Live Vision camera, which was just a garbage webcam. You can't forget that. PS3 had the PlayStation Eye, but both of these evolved into the major accessories
PlayStation
for the
Eye
console,
2?
the Kinect and PlayStation Move. The Kinect was a camera that could sense your whole body. You could control the games with no controller.
Really?
The PlayStation Move used the PlayStation Eye to read wands.
Just
the Kinect automatically had more marketing potential and definitely did better right out the gate. The Move was a fine accessory, but it more so felt like a way to let the PS3 play Wii-type games. The Kinect, as terrible as it could be, allowed for much more possibilities with games not playable with standard controllers. But at least the PlayStation Move didn't take its company and obliterate it for 4 years straight. Kinect forced Microsoft into a casual entertainment perspective and made them lack ambition in the gaming landscape. The PlayStation Move, while it wasn't as exciting at the time, it was used in less offensive ways. It was often just an option, and it worked well for the most part. It was a side thing for Sony rather than their core focus. But Kinect had more games.
Yeah, and then they try to force you to get to Kinect with the Xbox One.
PlayStation Move to make people leave your house. There just wasn't a ton of compelling software for it. Kinect had a ton more absolute garbage, but it at least justified itself with some titles. Plus, the idea was more novel than PlayStation Move. With that said, I think all the features packed into the PlayStation 3, plus its motion controller being non-obtrusive and fine, I think I'll give the features and accessories point to PS3. Kinect had more purpose, but it was bogged down with imprecise controls, terrible games, and overall tanking Microsoft's image in the latter half of the 360's
After watching
life.
Kid Icarus
Games
video
like Kinect Sports and Dance Central may have been decent
on
enough to
skateboarding,
purchase,
where he talked about
more
the Kinect?
iconic than the entirety of games that required PlayStation Move, but they just aren't a big enough deal to really make me vastly prefer the Kinect to the Move. I could go with one or the other most of the time, but with the PS3's suite of features, I think it takes this round.
Valid.
Which of these systems is the easiest to use while not compromising on options?
I mean, I'm going to give you the Xbox.
The 360's user interface has changed 3 times throughout the years, each one having their own fans.
They're all amazing.
Landing on this one. Honestly, I never had much of a problem with this interface. It's quick,
the new one
snappy, everything is
the Xbox One interface.
Understandable fashion. It makes sense. I don't think I've had to look up where certain things are on Google or anything. A few more advertisements than I'd prefer, but hey, this works quite well. The PS3 has had the cross-media bar since launch.
I've never understood that.
It's generally been the same vibe throughout the years. I do like this. I think
I couldn't tell you how to navigate a PlayStation to save my life.
On the left and right, and then up and down are the options within the option you've selected.
Which makes sense.
I do think that this interface is a bit bland compared to all of the 360s, and it does have a bit too many options. If we go to settings, it's really difficult to tell which setting is the specific setting you want to use. It's great if you really want to get down and dirty with
What do you mean
PS3,
printer settings?
I want to adjust something. Half the time I don't know which option to pick. I definitely have to Google how to adjust things every time, but hey.
Can you connect your
we have tons of things to mess around with.
PlayStation 3 to a printer?
But holy shit. Do I hate using this thing? The PS3 is a temperamental child. There's always something going on with it. Of course, the infamous updates. Pretty much every time I boot a game up, there's an update. There's something I have to install. Of course, most of the time I can't do anything in the background. I have to sit and watch this thing load.
That's annoying.
And this thing freezes up so much more than the 360. Installing, loading, updates. I'm always at the edge of my seat when the PS3 is doing any of this because there's a solid chance something's gonna go wrong.
Yeah.
The Xbox 360 is simpler and just works most of the time. I pop in a game, if it has to update, it downloads it pretty fast. Barely any game.
Is he going to talk about
stuff.
like
its user interface is simple?
Xbox Live versus
the PS3
PSN?
Is in the top 40 worst.
Because I think PSN used to be free, right?
On a positive note, it's in the top 40 best. Online play was incredibly important during this generation. I should know, I barely used it. But both of these systems did lean heavily into the online multiplayer crowd. If you were buying one of these systems, you gave a shit.
Yep.
Xbox 360 was generally considered the king of online multiplayer. Connection was great, the interface for setting up parties and hopping into games was simple and intuitive.
Yeah.
Good stuff. PS3
private chats
bad,
because you couldn't be in a party while playing Search and Destroy on Call of Duty.
360 was in its early years. It took a while, but the PS3 eventually got everything together and was pretty competent. But there was one big point against Xbox Live.
You had to pay for Live.
You had to pay for it.
Wasn't like really cheap though?
No,
What
that's
was
not
it, $5 a month or
whatever?
whatever?
To feed. Xbox Live Gold was $60 a year. Now, per year. That's not too bad. That's pretty reasonable. But if you wanted a slightly spottier service for free a year, you could buy a PS3 and spend that $60 you would have spent on online multiplayer on a new video game instead. You could have paid for
didn't it also get like hacked? And also didn't PSN go down?
PlayStation Plus. This service gave you the ability to play betas for upcoming games, gave you exclusive sale prices for games, and updates.
Now
could
games
be
just
downloaded to your
release as
console
betas
automatically instead of having to sit through it every time. You had to pay for that? The biggest deal was that you would get free games every month downloaded to your system for as long as you kept your Plus membership. Xbox would later offer monthly free games for Xbox Live Gold members in 2013, right before their next console would come out. Great.
I remember
PlayStation
that.
Plus was kind of
Games
cool.
with gold.
They lacked some weird features behind a premium paywall. But just to watch something like Netflix on the Xbox 360, something you already had to pay for monthly, you needed a gold subscription. That's dumb.
Really?
But
oh,
I had to choose between the two. The 360 did have the better online component. Both did some dumb things, but we're also used to paying for online multiplayer now that it's not that big of a deal.
You didn't even talk about the
Generally speaking,
security
which
thing that happened.
console looked the best? Well, most people probably know the PlayStation 3 was more powerful than the Xbox 360. Yes, most people. Ask Ed Asner, he'd know. But
I don't know
when
who
you
that is.
compare the two, they are pretty on par with each other. While many PS3 exclusives looked phenomenal at the time,
what are these cars
didn't
doing on
look
a
that much
track?
worse. In fact, because the 360 had a bigger install base for most of its life and was easier to develop for, most third-party games ended up looking better on 360 because they were made with that hardware.
Oh, this is Portal, isn't it? That looked like
by better, I
Portal
really mean
2,
it. We're splitting
maybe.
hairs here, but 360 does look
guess.
slightly nicer. Playing
Was
something
that
like
on?
Bioshock Infinite on the PS3, I do notice a lot more dirty-looking textures compared to the 360 version. Third-party games look and run a bit better on
Bioshock
360.
Infinite's that old?
And while there are a handful of
Orange
cases
box,
where
yep.
the PS3 version of a game is drastically worse than the 360 one, most of the time, it's not that noticeable. Playing the PS3 version isn't much different at all from the 360 one. But the developers working exclusively with the PS3, the developers who actually took the time to figure out how to use the system to the best of its abilities, my god, some of these games look just as good as PlayStation 4 titles. Just comparing two exclusives for each system that released in 2011, Gears of War 3 and Uncharted 3,
in 2011.
Uncharted does look better to me, but the 360 can do some really impressive
Rise of the Tomb Raider,
stuff,
another game I streamed.
Really impressive. Just look at Rise of the Tomb Raider on the system from 2015. This was an Xbox One game, but the 360 version looks incredible for the console. And it doesn't even require an install or multiple discs.
dude,
the Xbox
install.
360 can put out some crazy
GTA
graphics.
5.
But the PlayStation 3, at its best, will always look a little bit better to me.
Was it a year or a couple months
Play
before
my older games, even though I'll never play them.
GTA
Backward
5
compatibility
came
is
out?
Such a luxury to have, even if you barely use it. And the PlayStation 3 initially was set to be the ultimate PlayStation. It could play all generations. And then the PS2 support was taken out of the cheaper models to cut costs.
Of course.
And then they got rid of it entirely.
Oh,
But
excellent.
the Xbox 360 can
Mad
play
No.
the
8.
original Xbox games.
Yep.
This is the ultimate pleasure.
Reading? If it can read the disc. What?
Could you imagine a worse note to get on your windshield? So both consoles have trouble with playing older games. All PS3s play PS1 discs, but a specific version of the original model is the only one that can play PS2 games. Some PS1 and PS2 games are available to download from the
What?
PlayStation Network store,
Persona
and
4.
various PS2 games were re-released in high definition via collections, so regardless, you had some options on PS3. The Xbox 360 can play a little less than half of the original Xbox library.
There were so many Xbox
games.
games.
360 every now and then, offering more and more original Xbox games that were supported until they just gave up. Even though most of the major Xbox releases you'd care to play are supported, many of them have issues. The Wikipedia list of the Xbox games that were backwards compatible has a specific column denoting issues, so that says it all right there. However, all the games run fine enough. Many of the titles were re-released via downloads on Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network, and while Xbox Live Arcade was easily the more popular of the two, most legacy titles appeared on both services. These two both have their problems with playing legacy content, but the PS3 had the most options and always supported PS1 discs.
Valid.
I already talked about how third-party multi-platform games generally looked and ran better on Xbox 360, and yeah,
I remember when exclusives were such a big
Sometimes
deal.
third-party games have to install trash on PS3, but they just immediately boot on the 360. Like, come on. Most of the time, the graphical differences are incredibly minor.
We have not had a Bioshock game in that long.
If you're playing a third-party game on PS3, you don't have much to worry about. Is not a big deal. But to combat any graphical differences, many third-party PS3 games offer exclusive content, whether that's exclusive characters in fighting games, exclusive missions and modes, PlayStation Move support. That's all pretty cool. Xbox 360 versions really didn't have much to offer in comparison. I mean, Call of Duty DLC came to Xbox first. Oh jeez, I better get Black Ops 2 in 2020. But most of the time,
oh god, isn't 2025 Black Ops 2 year?
To want to own that version instead of the 360.
The whole year early access.
In BioShock Infinite, that's way
the Call of Duty
DLC
Kinect
support in Mass Effect 3, where it's literally just screeching at your Xbox to make choices on screen. And some people like playing shooters with motion controls. It was a cooler incentive than noise complaints. However, a lot of these exclusive features didn't amount to a lot.
But the
cool
voice controls kind of worked pretty well.
Most third-party games were made for Xbox 360, and thus, they just work better on the platform.
And now it's time. Exclusives.
Most major third-party games came to each console. You weren't missing out on much if you were a big THQ nut and you owned a 360. What this all boils down to is, which console had the best exclusive games? The Xbox 360 had Halo, Gears of War, Fable, Forza, Crackdown. The PlayStation 3 had Uncharted, Resistance, Little Big Planet, Ratchet & Clank, Sly Cooper, Killzone, Infamous, God of War, Metal Gear Solid 4, Gran Turismo, Mod Nation Racers, Puppeteer, The Last of Us. Okay.
All games I haven't played.
Okay, this may be a bit unfair. To give Microsoft credit, they did quite a good job in the first half of the 360's life with exclusives. I mean, Halo 3 launching will always be one of the biggest events in gaming history. Even looking at the best PlayStation 3 exclusives, they just don't hold a candle to the amount of excitement around the world for that one game.
And I did not participate in it.
And Forza took over the racing sim crown from Gran Turismo. Like, my god, they had Forza games releasing every single year, and the Gran Turismo team was just like, here's a prequel to Gran Turismo 5, because for some reason we're taking 20 years to make it.
Also, the fact that
for some reason they put out Gran Turismo 6 after the PlayStation 4 launched. With digital bite-sized titles, Xbox Live Arcade,
which is still a car you can buy new, which
so
is
many
about
fun
to go away.
experiences on there. PSN. They secured games like BioShock and Mass Effect. Mass Effect 2 was exclusive for a year. Now, each of these games came to PS3 eventually, and timed exclusives aren't my idea for a fun afternoon, but at least showed they meant business. They got Grand Theft Auto to jump away from being a timed PlayStation exclusive franchise. They got Final Fantasy to come to Xbox finally. They really cared, and then they gave up. Once
and then they gave up.
They let their guard down, and while Sony was already starting to kill it, they really went crazy funding exclusive content. Not only were they making amazing exclusive games, but sequels to those games. And not only were these games great, but they had a huge variety of games exclusive to PlayStation 3. There's a reason the only things people think about when Xbox is brought up are Halo, Gears of War, and Forza. Kinect exclusives could be sort of cute,
I mean, I didn't even know which was exclusive or not.
Jesus. One of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. That got so many people to buy a PS3. And then you had some of the more unknown games. Puppeteer is really charming. And not all PS3 exclusives were winners. Some of them definitely missed the mark, but many PS3 exclusives were truly experiences worth investing in a PS3 for. The PS3 may have been rough around the edges and difficult to use in many areas, but I don't even have to finish this sentence.
Winner
so the
PS3.
PS3 won, which is weird considering that I used a 360 back in the day. To be fair, it could have gone either way, but based on my taste at the moment,
1 point went just because of the final 360, but it's close.
Even if it's an absolute bitch to use. But turns out I'm not blinded by nostalgia or love for a specific company. I picked the PS3 when the 360 was the console I owned, so that's a plus to my reviewing skills. The only thing the PS3 could use is a version of Mario Party 9. This game's actually terrible, but I love it because it's made by Nintendo.
Why, Scott? Why? Oh, man. Well, if you agree or disagree, let me know. I mean, I grew up with the Xbox 360, so I can't really disagree with that. I just only know what I have played. I've never touched a PlayStation 3 before, so I can't really say if I can't agree or disagree. I could just say that I had a 360, and a 360 was good enough for me, and that was the team that I was, I guess, put on, because my brother, I just did whatever my brother did, and he liked Xbox and Call of Duty, so I liked Xbox, Call of Duty, Army of Two, Need for Speed, Midtown Madness 2, always going to shout out that game. The Bible game, that's another game that was on the Xbox that I own and still own, which is scary. But let me know what the next Scott the Waz video should be. Should be a Kid Icarus video coming out tomorrow. It's going to be about skateboarding games, which are also games that I grew up playing because my brother was, I guess, into skateboarders or skateboarding like a lot of kids were in the early 2000s. But that video will be out tomorrow. Patrons should get it today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Hope that you are subscribed, and I look forward to the next Scott the Waz video. But until then, take care and cue the music.
We were playing